So, hello everybody. I'm very happy to be here with you. We wanted to talk about a huge topic that we can hear about all across the world: heat stress in livestock. And as you know, it's not only about temperature, it's also about humidity. So, for example, at 85% humidity range, you have a moderate heat stress that will start at 22 degrees, while again, 85% humidity range, you will have a severe heat stress that starts at 26 degrees Celsius. So it concerns everyone here. And even in countries where the temperature is not that high, compared, for example, to Middle East or some Asia countries, where it's even more challenging with some areas where you can have temperatures that can reach 40 to 45 degrees with like 90% humidity. And then it's a huge challenge to manage in those areas. So today we have Alex Bach that is here. Dr. Alex Bach is a dairy production researcher in Spain, and he is also a professor at the Catalan Institute Research and Advanced Studies. And on my side, I'm a ruminant product manager at Team Magnesium. So on my side, I will more present you some information about our product pHix-up, but Alex will start the webinar to understand why heat stress is a key factor to manage in ruminants. And then I will present you some information about our product pHix-up. Maybe to have a better idea of the different areas we are covering today with our webinar, could you please share your country, city in the chats and give us an idea of what is the temperature and humidity that can be reached in that area? So how much is heat stress is a threat for you? Taking this also into consideration, if you have any questions during that webinar, you can ask them in the chat. So feel free. During Alex's presentation, we will stop at some times to check the questions and to reply to some of the questions. At the end of Alex's presentation also, and then at the end of the webinar, we'll check the last questions. So feel free to ask your questions anytime. And now I give the floor to Alex.
Well, thank you very much, Melody. It's a pleasure to be here and be able to share some thoughts about heat stress with you guys. I'm going to share the screen and get into it right over. As Melody said, if you do have a question during my talk, just type it in the chat and Melody will stop me and then I will try to answer the question if I know the answer. If not, I'll just move on. Just kidding. So we'll talk about heat stress. As Melody was saying, it's important topic. It's affecting more and more a greater number of cows because of climate change. When does it occur? It occurs when the animal it's coping with its own ability to dissipate the heat. So it tries to dissipate the heat that it produces, and that heat is produced in the rumen, is produced inside the cells when they metabolize the nutrients, is produced when the cows walk around. So there is a lot of heat being produced by the animal that needs to be released. And if that's not dissipated or released, and then on top of that, there is a lot of heat outside, then the animal cannot maintain the thermoneutral temperature of their body. Okay, so then there is an accumulation of heat in their body and the rectal temperature goes up. That, of course, has detrimental effects on animal welfare to begin with, but also on production as well as morbidity and mortality. So that's why it's an important topic that we should keep in mind in seasons of heat. As Melody was saying, heat stress will occur not only depending on the temperature, but also on the humidity, right? It's the relationship between temperature and humidity what will make things difficult for the cow to dissipate the heat. So we could have relatively high temperatures at low humidity. Those will be better sustained by the animal than when we have low temperatures with lots of humidity. Okay, so we need to combine both. And in this graph, you can see where the cow will, so that's the temperature, the THI index, that will be temperature and relative humidity index. So it's a combination of both. And whenever the animals are below 68 THI, then there is no stress. The animals are able to dissipate all the heat they produce. We start to have problems when THIA goes between 68 and 71, and above 72, we already have heat stress, okay? Which is quite common. So it's nowadays in many countries, even if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, you will have periods where cows are exposed to THIAs above 72. So when that happens, when the cows are exposed to high temperatures, they will try to dissipate heat. And when the dissipation of heat cannot outweigh the external temperature, then the cows will opt for changing their behavior. And they will start taking a lot of measures. And one of them will be decreased feed intake. That makes a lot of sense because when the cows are eating, one of the reasons why cows, to start with, they have a greater body temperature than the rest of mammals is because as ruminants, they have a fermentation chamber in their body, and that fermentation chamber releases a lot of heat. So one effective way of reducing the heat that the animal has to dissipate is putting less wood or less material into that furnace, which is the rumen. So that's why they start eating less, so there is less fermentation and less heat being produced. They will also increase their standing time. Okay, so they will typically commingle in groups, almost touching each other, but not touching. So they will try to create a stream of air that will go underneath, in between the legs, and then in between the bodies of the cows. That's going to create like a little momentum of air moving around, and that's going to cool them off a little bit. Okay, so that's one change in behavior that they'll do. Of course, that's going to have some consequences. It's going to have energy considerations. The animal will spend more energy that would have been used to produce milk or to reproduce or to fight disease, because now they are standing, and that requires some energy. And also they're laying down less, so they are putting more stress into their foot, so they might have some problems with lameness and other things. Okay. Other behavior changes that they will endure is they will alter the meal patterns. Under normal thermoneutral conditions, the cows will have their regular eating pattern, typically described by large meals right after the fresh feed is offered, hopefully coinciding with the exit of the milking parlor. And then they will have just small meals done in the rest of the day. When it's hot, they will avoid eating when it's hot, and they will concentrate their feed meals when it's a little bit cooler. So that's probably at night or at dawn or when there is less heat. Of course, they will also increase water intake. That's another change in behavior. And that's in part to compensate the increased sweating. Okay, that's the most effective ways that the cows can dissipate heat. We just have to keep in mind from a nutritional standpoint that the sweating cows is very rich in potassium. So if we have a limitation of potassium in the diet, then the cows will not be able to sweat, and therefore they will have trouble to dissipate body temperature. Potassium is the most important one, but also sodium. Sodium also participates in sweating. So we also need to make sure that a minimum sodium is present in the diet, and we'll talk about this a bit later. So the other thing that the cows will do is they will change their respiratory behavior. Okay, so they will, and that will occur in two stages. The first stage, which is the less severe and usually works under not very severe situations, is tachypnea. Okay, tachypnea is basically an increased frequency of breathing with a decreased tidal volume, so that the lungs don't expand totally, and they just breathe very rapidly. And that usually happens with a closed mouth. If that's not sufficient, then the cow will go to a second stage, which is hyperpnea, and that's increased respiratory rate and panting. But of course, then they will reduce the frequency of breath, and they will increase the tidal. So there will be longer breaths and with a greater volume. And that will take place with an open mouth, as you can see in the picture on the right side. That has consequences on the metabolism of the animal. When the animal starts breathing quite frequently, there is a loss of CO2 through the air, and that reduces CO2 in blood. Whenever CO2 goes down in blood, due to the bicarbonate carbonic acid balance in blood, pH goes up. That's a transient increase in blood pH. So the animals will have for a few minutes and alkalosis. But that will be rapidly compensated by a metabolic acidosis, because the excess of acid in blood in form of carbonic acid will be excreted in urine. But there will be a retention of chlorine in blood, and that will reduce blood pH. So typically cows under heat stress, besides all these changes in behavior that we've seen, they will have a lower blood pH than the physiological level. And that has consequences on intake, as you'll see later. Now, we're talking about heat stress, and we've been talking a lot about what is heat and what the changes in behavior entail, that exposure to heat. But there is a second word, which is stress. Okay, and the stress is a common reaction that animals in general, and cows especially, but everyone has, is a common response, is a common physiological response to a threat. So cows will respond always in the same manner with a stress situation. If they perceive there is a threat. So if the cows are afraid because there is one guy that yells at them or chase them, they will respond with stress. If the cows are hungry, they will respond with stress. If the cows are hot, they will also respond with stress. So it's a common answer for very different inputs, okay? And one of them could be increased temperatures. And then the cow sees that as a threat. She's unable to dissipate the heat that she needs to dissipate. So now she's going to get stressed. One important aspect of stress is that it's additive. So we can have different levels of stress. What I'm representing here is the metabolic partition of nutrients in any given cow. So I'm going to start from the bottom. And what it is, this is the hierarchy of nutrient utilization in cows. So the first amount of energy or protein that the animal has available, it will go first utilized by the basal and vital functions: heart rate, respiratory rate, standing, walking. Now, if there is additional energy and protein, and the cow is a young one and still growing, then it's going to grow. Then if there is additional protein and energy, then she's going to produce milk. Okay, this is one of the reasons why primiparous cows, there are other reasons, but one of the reasons why primiparous cows produce less milk than multiparous is because whatever energy they eat, it will go first to sustain growth. And then whatever is left, it will go for milk. Then still, if there is some more energy left, it will go for the immune function. Then for reproduction. And finally, if there is still all this discovered and still the cows are eating more energy and protein, it will go to body reserves. That's under normal situations. Now you have another cow that is exposed to heat stress or hunger stress or social stress, whatever stress you want. That's going to come up with a ticket, with a toll, with a penalty. That's going to take energy away to do something else. These changes in behavior that I was talking about. The cow will stand longer. The cow will walk more. She will look for a shade. She's going to start doing things that's going to increase heart rate. So all that, it takes more energy. So now, if the cow eats the same, she's going to still be vital, grow, produce milk, have a good immune response, good reproduction. But now she's a bit stressed. She's not putting body weight. Okay, that's difficult to see, right? You're not going to see any signs on those cows. You think that, hey, everything is normal, I don't have to be worried. Then you have another cow with a greater degree of stress. So on top of being exposed to heat stress, there is a lack of water in the pen, or there's a lot of stocking density, too many cows in one pen, or the cows are dirty, or they're being chased for the milking parlor with yells. So that causes more stress. And that stress is going to take energy away, now in this case from reproduction and immune function. But if you're a guy that you just manage your cows by milk production, you might still be thinking, hey, I have no problem. My cows are doing well, they're milking like crazy, but this is just a bomb waiting to be exploded, okay? It's just gonna burst in your face at some point, because it's just a matter of time that these cows that don't have energy for immune function or for reproduction, they're gonna crack. So they're gonna have mastitis, they're gonna have lameness or whatever, okay? So you could go down the road and increase the level of this heat stress, and then you're gonna have less milk and less growth, and then you see the problems. But when you see the problems in milk, it's definitely too late. And that's the message I want to convey with this slide, is that you don't have to wait to take action against heat stress when milk production goes down. if you do that, it's way too late. You've already caused a lot of damage to the cows, okay? Because you've shut down repro, you've shut down immune response. So one thing that happens when there is heat stress, and this is the theory, okay? Because one thing that we see, and I'll show you just in the next slide, is that cows do lose a lot of milk production when they're in heat stress. And the theories that explain that is probably there is an intestinal hypoxia because blood goes into the periphery of the animal. So it goes to dissipate heat, it goes under the skin. And that limits the amount of blood that goes into the intestine. And that is thought to cause some damage in the intestinal wall and increases the permeability. This is a theory, okay? It's an hypothesis. It has not been validated. And I don't think there is a lot of evidence to sustain it, okay? They should endure a very heavy lack of irrigation in the intestine to produce intestinal damage, okay? So it's a theory, I just leave it there. What is clear, though, is that heat stress runs with an increased tract hyperpermeability. So it's like what is called leaky gut. So now the gut is unable to keep everything outside and opens the door for bacteria to penetrate or for fragments of bacteria, and then the immune system goes to the roof. And then you see things like that, okay? You have cows that have what is called an inflammatory response syndrome, which is all the body is an inflammation state, and you have multi-organ dysfunction syndrome. Basically, it's pretty much the same thing. You can see here a picture of intestines with fibrin and some petechia, these reddish dots. That would illustrate that there is no hypoxia there, right? There is blood definitely there because that's why you have this blood accumulated in there. On the second row, you see a heart and the kidney, also with petechia and very high degrees of inflammation. And at the bottom, you see the lungs and the pleura with fibrina and also edema and petechia. And those are images from cows that are in high degree of heat stress, and they actually die of heat stress. They could die. So why is this happening? It's still a syndrome, okay? We don't know exactly why it happens, right? One of the theories that the stress is the big part of it, okay? So this response that I was talking about that the animals give when they feel a threat, it's gonna kick up the immune system, it's gonna kick up the inflammation system, and that's gonna do damage in organs that in theory they should be okay. And it's gonna take a lot of energy out of the animal. So this is what typically happens. This is a nice study that was conducted by Lang Baumgart a few years ago. They just use perfect cows. So that means that they had cows that they were exposed to heat and cows that were in a room with air conditioning. And of course, the cows that were under heat, they consume less feed. So if the cows reduce 2 kilos of feed intake, they went to the cows that were in the room with air conditioning, and they say, okay, I'm gonna also take 2 kilos of your feed. So you're gonna eat the same as the cows that are in heat stress. So if they eat the same, they should also produce the same milk. But no, what they saw is that the cows that were under heat stress, the milk production went down from 40 kilos to about 30. But cows that were not in heat stress, but they ate the same amount of the cows that were in heat stress, milk production also went down because they were eating less, so that's normal, but it didn't go as low as the ones in heat stress. It only reduced from 45 to 40, about 5 liters, okay? While the other ones, they lose more than 10 liters. So why is this? So why is the cow producing less milk when she's on heat stress if she eats the same that cows are eating the same, but not in heat stress? Well, the answer is the activation of the immune system, okay? These cows that are heat stressed, they have an immune response. This is a similar study from another university, a more recent one from 2023, and you see the same thing. The blue line is perfect, and the other ones are, the yellow and the red are cows that are in heat stress. So why is that happening? I was saying, this is an increase on the immune response, okay? Why is that immune response elicited? Part of it, I think, is just the perception. So this stress response that the animal has to a perception of a threat. And the cow is saying, okay, this is going nuts. I'm not doing well. I'm going to kick up my stress system. So that's going to elicit a multisystemic immune activation. The other one is the leaky gut, okay? Why do we have the leaky gut? We still don't know, but of course that's going to permeate some lipopolysaccharides and other fragments of bacteria that will also activate the immune system, and that's going to cost energy. Interestingly, in this study that I show you, where they have this per feeding, one of the treatments they had is they treat the cows with vitamin D and calcium. And even though that was not able to compensate milk production, if I just go back here, you'll see that there is a big difference in water intake and primary intake and milk yield here on the left. The immune response was lower, okay? So if you look at the yellow bar, you have less lipopolysaccharide binding protein and less calprotectin, which are two molecules indicative of leaky gut, sorry. So the conclusion of this study is that once you feed more vitamin D and calcium to these animals that are stressed, the gut becomes less permeable, okay, somehow. But still, you get a decrease in milk production, which goes along with this perception of stress and activation of the immune system and the cost that goes along with it. But at least with vitamin D and calcium, you may actually reduce a little bit this increased permeability in the gut. And there is evidence in other species, like in mouse, that actually, if you supplement these mice with vitamin D and calcium, the severity of inflammatory bowel disease actually decreases. So that's one way that you could help cows under heat stress conditions. It's not going to change milk production, but it may actually help to maintain gut integrity. In terms of nutrition, what can you do? You have two options. Of course, you're faced with a cow that is eating less. So you still want to provide nutrients to this animal, especially knowing that the immune system is going to be activated. So now you need to feed the mammary gland to produce milk, and you also need to feed the immune system because it's activated. So you can use carbohydrates, you can use fat. You have to keep in mind that if you use carbohydrates, it doesn't matter whether it's corn or is alfalfa hay or whatever carbohydrate is, at the cellular level. Not at the rumen level, of course. At the rumen level, it will generate lots of heat, but at the cellular level, will also generate some heat, okay? And fats will generate about between 10 and 15% less heat than carbohydrates. So that's why people go and feed more fats in summer, because it's a way of providing more energy to the animal per unit of grams or per kilo, and also per grams or kilos of fat, you will generate also less heat to the animal. So this can be illustrated in this graph, in this table, where you see different products, haylage, corn silage, and at the bottom you have fats. And if you go to the right side column where it says heat increment per net energy of lactation, you see that soybean oil, palm oil, prills, tallow, they are in the order of 200. Okay, well, if you look at haylage or corn silage, they're in the order of 600. So it's 3 times more. You will generate 3 times more heat if the animal derives energy from carbohydrates than if it derives it from oils. Okay, so a good practice, well, not a good practice, a common practice during heat stress is to increase the fat level of the diet. You have to be careful with that because we're still feeding ruminants. And even though the cow can use fat as an energy source, microbes in the rumen cannot. Okay, so you have to find the right balance between concentrating your diet with a little bit of fat for energy, but you also need to put carbohydrates. Then what happens there is that you may run into rumen acidosis. Okay, people say, well, you are because cows are heat stressed and now they're sweating a lot and they're a little bit dehydrated. They secrete less saliva. Also, because they eat less, they produce less saliva. So now you have lower buffering capacity in the rumen. You have a greater risk of rumen acidosis. So if you increase your NFC or your starch level of the ration, you may have a greater chance of having rumen acidosis. However, the real cause of rumen acidosis is the accumulation of acid in the rumen. And that's a consequence of consuming high amounts of carbohydrates. And if you have cows that really decrease intake, then it's really difficult to have an increased accumulation of acid in the rumen. And therefore, the chances of rumen acidosis is typically lower than one would expect okay, even though if you increase starch level of the ration. And in fact, there are some studies that report that rumen pH increases with cows exposed to heat stress. And that's a consequence of exactly what I'm saying. They eat less, they have less starch in the rumen, so there is lower risk of rumen acidosis. This is just for you to think a little bit. You can see here squares and circles. And on the y-axis, you see rumen pH. And on the y-axis, on the x-axis, you have the amount of carbohydrates that the animals eat. And the squares correspond to beef animals. And you know that beef animals, they feedlot animals, they consume rations that have like 60% NFC. So on paper, this ration should create rumen acidosis, right? Because 60% NFC is very high. Look at the pH, it's about 6.4. Okay, so that doesn't look like rumen acidosis. The circles are dairy cows. And then you look at dairy cows and how much NFC is in the diet of a dairy cow, 40%, so almost 50% less than a feedlot cow. But rumen pH is lower. Why? Because what matters to cows is not percentages, it's amounts. Okay, so it's the amount of starch or the amount of NFC, kilos per day, not percentage in the diet, that arrive to the rumen. Okay, so if you have cows that before they ate 27 kilos and now they eat 18 because they're heat stress, you should be not afraid of putting more starch in your diet, okay, because that's not going to yield to rumen acidosis. Okay? It's more difficult. One thing that happens when you don't take that advantage of putting more carbohydrates and you go to put more fat is you're going to starve the microbes in the rumen. And when that happens, this is like a bacteria, the circle one, and you see that there is protein outside the bacteria. That protein will be broken down into amino acids and peptides outside the bacteria. Then those peptides and amino acids are taken out inside the bacteria. And then only if, and that's important, there is energy available for the bacteria, and that energy will come from carbohydrates, will not come from fat, those amino acids and peptides will be converted into microbial protein. If there is no energy available for bacteria, which is the case when you do rations for stressed cows with lots of fat, these bacteria cannot use fat. So now what they'll say is, okay, I have to grow. The only thing that this guy is feeding me is protein. So I'm going to remove the nitrogen from the protein. I'm going to have a carbon skeleton, which is equivalent to a carbohydrate, and I'm going to ferment it. And I'm going to use protein as an energy source. And that can lead to acidosis. Okay. This is a study where they had a ration with 11% all the way to 17% crude protein. Look at the VFA accumulation in the rumen. It goes from 92 to 100. And NFC goes from 48 to 41. So you have less NFC when you have lots of protein. So 17% crude protein gives you 41% NFC, but you have more VFAs in the rumen. Why? Because bacteria are using that protein as an energy source. Of course, ammonia goes up, and that's your friend for rumen pH. It will increase rumen pH, but that's not always going to be the case. Okay, so you have to be aware that when you're feeding lots of protein and not a carbohydrate source, you can accumulate VFAs in the rumen because bacteria will use that protein as an energy source. So what are the things you can do if you're afraid about having rumen acidosis under heat stress? Then you can use buffers or alkalinizers. This is an in vitro study where they're actually comparing the effectiveness of sodium bicarbonate or magnesium hydroxide or magnesium oxide. And at the bottom, I see an in vitro flask where I add glucose, and the pH at the beginning is about 7. And then as fermentation goes on, pH goes down to below 4. Then you go to the top graph and you see sodium bicarbonate, and you do the same thing. You add glucose, and then sodium pH is initially 7, and pH goes down to 4. No? So it's a bit higher than control, but still very low. You have magnesium hydroxide, and pH starts at 7. That's the graph in the middle, and it ends up at 6. So that's more effective. Okay. And also the interesting thing is that if you look at the graph at the top and at the bottom, there is circles. And that circles means the line with circles, which is the biggest one, is lactic acid accumulation. So there's lactic acid being accumulated in control and in sodium bicarbonate. But you don't see the circles in the graph in the middle with magnesium oxide. Why? Because you were able to maintain pH above 6. So lactobacillus and Streptococcus bovis and all these bacteria that produce lactic acid were not able to grow at that pH, or they grew, but not much. So that's one of the reasons why pH also stayed higher. Okay, so that's a preferred method to increase rumen pH if you're worried about it. Okay, under heat stress. An important aspect, if you're going to consider to use magnesium oxide, you have to look at the quality of it. Not all the magnesium oxides are the same, and the only way that magnesium oxide will do the trick, both as a source of magnesium and as an alkalinizer in the rumen, is that magnesium oxide becomes magnesium hydroxide, and that will only happen when magnesium is solubilized in water. Okay. There are many qualities of magnesium in the field, and you can have magnesiums that will rapidly be solubilized, and those are desirable. There are some magnesium oxides that they are not solubilized at all, and you're just wasting your money and taking space in the ration, okay? Because that's not a source of magnesium and it's not an alkalinizer. Other things you have to take into account nutrition-wise. Like I said at the beginning, the cows will sweat a lot, and that sweat, it's driven by putting potassium outside. So that's going to attract water, and then cows will sweat with potassium. So you should increase, I know that is expensive because potassium carbonate and other sources of potassium are expensive, but you should try to feed a ration that's at least 1.5, 1.6% potassium, okay? Because cows will need that potassium to sweat. Of course, when you do that, you have to take into account other minerals, okay? Not for buffering capacity, but just for absorption, and that would be magnesium. Potassium and magnesium, they compete for the same transporters in the rumen. And if you increase the amount of potassium in the diet, then you will decrease the amount of magnesium that's available for the cow. And that's a little bit of a problem, as I'll show you in a few slides down the road. Other things that will happen, and there is little you can do about this, but the cows under heat stress will have reduced aldosterone, and that will, because they want to save potassium for sweating. But of course, that's going to increase the renal excretion of sodium. Okay, so now the cows, they not only need potassium in the diet, you also have to provide some sodium in the diet. Okay, and there are some studies that have shown that feeding more sodium also increases milk production and intake. One other problem that we have to face, and that's one of the reasons why the cows stop eating when they are heat stressed, is because as they try to preserve potassium, and as I said before, the same thing with carbon dioxide in blood, they will have a little metabolic acidosis. And whenever I have metabolic acidosis, the cows will stop eating, okay? It's the same thing that when we feed anionic salts. We think that anionic salts are unpalatable, but the reason why cows eat less when they have anionic salts is because the blood pH goes down. This is a study that we did with dairy cows. The control line is intake of cows that are normally fed. The open squares is a cow that we put through the rumen cannula a bolus of anionic salts. So it didn't go through the mouth. So it has nothing to do with palatability. And look at what happens with intake. It goes down from 25 to 22. You lose 3 kilos, not because of palatability, just because of metabolic acidosis. So that's the same thing that happens to a cow in heat stress. Their blood pH is low, so they have less appetite because they are coping with low pH. Okay. In this case, and look at the impact. This is only one dose of anionic salts, and it takes about 4 days for the cows to recover intake. Okay? So now imagine that you are always in metabolic acidosis, that in 3, 4, 5 days, because of heat stress, your intake goes down. Okay, that's what I said about sodium. That is also interesting to put a little bit more sodium in the diet, just to compensate these aldosterone effects on sodium losses. And then the last one also about magnesium. You may want to increase magnesium supplementation in the diet, not only because of buffering capacity in the rumen, but also because cows, they need magnesium. Huh? So people, when they think about milk, they always think, oh, milk is a great source of calcium. Yeah, it's true. Milk has 1% calcium, so it's very rich in calcium. The second most important mineral in milk is magnesium, which is 0.3. And differently from calcium, which is tightly regulated by calcitonin, PTH, vitamin D, all these things, magnesium is not regulated. There is nothing that controls the amount of magnesium in the body. And even though magnesium is a super important mineral for many functions in the rumen, in the body, is not really well controlled. So what happens under heat stress? Typically, magnesium blood levels go down. Okay, that may cause some problems on muscle contraction. It could also induce some problems on behavior of the cows. They get a little bit dizzy, like if they had acidosis, metabolic acidosis. Okay. And the cow is not able to compensate that decrease of magnesium through the bone because they have no regulation, they have no hormones that will say, hey, I need magnesium, give me some. So it only depends on the magnesium from the diet. So now you have animals that eat less, they're heat stress, they're losing magnesium, and you need to provide more. Otherwise, they have no chance of compensating that, because the only way that they can compensate it is by the diet. And if they eat less, you need to put more magnesium in the diet. And on top of that, the diet that they will eat, chances are that you're putting potassium, because you are worried about potassium, rightly so. You need to put more potassium in the diet, but sometimes you forget about magnesium, okay? And you should provide both. This is a nice study from Japan where they actually look at what happens with magnesium in cows that are heat stress. And you see that cows that are in normal conditions, they were producing 43 liters of milk. When they went into heat stress, milk production went down by 7 liters. Now you look at concentrations of calcium or phosphorus, they were not affected by heat stress in milk. But you look at concentrations of magnesium in milk, and they went down by 20%. Okay, so that's already telling you that the cow is not able to compensate that. So if the cow needs calcium, she'll get it from the bone. If the cow needs magnesium, she has no place to go for it unless the diet. And here at the bottom, you see basically what happens when the cows are under heat stress. The amount of magnesium that goes into milk decreases. And of course, that's the amount of magnesium that goes into other functions that we cannot measure also decreases. So that's why it's important also to consider magnesium in your diets. And I think with this, I've used all my time. Just one more slide here. When considering the amount of magnesium in the diet, you have to take into account also the potassium in the diet, but also what I was saying, that sometimes, and that depends on the diet, depends on many things. You may have rumen acidosis, or you may have rumen alkalosis. Okay, if the cows really stop eating, you're not going to have rumen acidosis. You're going to have an increased pH in the rumen, and there, the solubility of magnesium oxide into magnesium hydroxide goes down the drain. Okay, here on the right, you see how rapidly the solubility of magnesium oxide changes with pH. At the moment pH goes up, magnesium solubility goes down, so it's not absorbed. Okay, so you may have a problem there as well. With heat stress, you're dealing with animals that they don't eat. Then at night, they change the feeding pattern, right? So now at night, they go and eat a lot. And then you're going to have a lot of starch in the rumen, and pH will go down. And then they will stop eating, and then pH will go up. So you have both. And you have to do a ration that will take care of rumen acidosis when the animals really decide to eat. And then you have to do a ration that will have animals with very high pH because they've been for a long time without eating, okay? So, and in both situations, magnesium is your friend there, because you'll need more magnesium when the pH is high, and you also need more magnesium when the pH is low to buffer the pH, okay? And with this, I think I'm almost done. What is this? Okay, yeah, this is just the blood flow in the rumen is a bit lower, so the absorption of magnesium also goes down, but the absorption of other nutrients also goes down. So that's another reason why you have to put more magnesium and minerals in your diet. And this is it, a nice picture of cows panting and suffering, which I hate seeing animals like this. So we have to also, of course, I haven't talked about it, but do a lot of ventilation and watering these cows so we can put their temperature down. That goes without saying. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Thank you, Alex. I think indeed there was some question. So yeah, I thought it was better to wait maybe for the end of your presentation to check all the questions. So we have a question. So at the beginning, you showed the effect of heat stress on the milk yield. And we have a question regarding also what about the composition of the milk?
Right. Yes, yes. Now that's a very good question. It's not all about liters, it's also about the composition. Composition of milk, as I showed you with magnesium, that it goes down. It also experiences some other changes in terms of protein and fat, especially fat. Fat typically goes down, okay? And protein, depending on your ration, might actually also go down. It will go down if you're feeding lots of fat, because when you feed lots of fat in your diet, you're starving bacteria, and bacteria is the major source of protein for milk production. But yeah, butter fat will go down, and protein, depending on your ration, will also go down.
There is also a question, so you replied a bit to it, but maybe it's good to talk about it again, regarding how beef cattle are also affected by high temperature and how. It's Emad from Egypt, so he's also saying that the temperature in Egypt can be up to 41 degrees during summer with a high humidity. So how does it affect beef cattle?
Yeah, I know. Feedlot cattle are also very highly affected by heat stress. All the ruminants, they don't cope well with heat stress because they have this fermentation chamber that generates heat, right? So, and especially with feedlots, that they also have higher NFC content in the diet, so they have higher starch and higher non-fiber carbohydrates. They are at a greater risk because the ruminants actually ferment more vigorously than the rations for cows. Cows have more fiber, so that ferments more slowly, so it generates heat more slowly. Feedlot, you have to be careful with that as well. Yeah. And the problem with feedlot, differently from cows, and that's a big problem, is that with cows you see milk going down. But with feedlot, you don't have body weights to see how the animals are suffering. You only see feed intake, and that's in many places not even measured. So it's really difficult to control and take action because you don't see it. Okay, the animals are suffering like crazy, but you don't see it.
Okay. There is also some questions. There are some questions regarding potassium carbonate, and what would be your recommendation regarding the use of potassium carbonate?
Yeah, it's an expensive ingredient. Okay, so I would try to first supply potassium through ingredients rich in potassium. So I would use lots of grasses and grains to come up with potassium. But if I cannot reach 1.5, 1.6% of the diet, then I will use potassium carbonate. Yeah. If I do that,
Okay.
I have to increase magnesium because they will compete with each other.
Yeah. And there is also a question regarding the use of antioxidants. So if in a diet during heat stress we use antioxidants, do you think it would help during heat stress to recover regarding the immune function?
There are some studies on that, and there are several studies on it, and the results are all over the place. So there is no consistent response. Okay. It's true that stress causes an increase in oxidation, but of course, heat stress also runs with a lower intake. So when you eat less, you oxidize less. So your oxidative stress also goes down. So that's why sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's not clear, so it depends.
Okay. And then regarding magnesium, what would be your recommendation in terms of quantity of magnesium in the ration during heat stress? And so maybe according to what we are using in a classic period without heat stress.
Right. Again, that's going to depend a little bit on your ration, right? I didn't mention in my presentation, but magnesium absorption. So you're going to use magnesium for two reasons. Why? To as a safety net for the rumen. And in that sense, I don't really care whether it's competing with other stuff, right? So for that, with 80 grams, maybe 90 grams per cow a day, I'm satisfied. But then if your ration is increasing in potassium or your ration is using a lot of fat, I didn't mention that in my talk, fat will also compete with magnesium absorption. So in those cases, you may have to increase a bit farther the amount of magnesium that you put in diet and go to 120, 110. So typically the rations would have 0.35 magnesium, and you may want to go up to 0.48, depending on the fats and the potassium levels of your diet. But minimum would be 0.35, and probably in the heat stress, I will go to 0.40. And then you will keep going up depending on the potassium and the fat.
Okay. And regarding the fat, is there a difference according to the source of fat you are using? Do you know?
Not for the rumen, but for the cow, there is a difference. So if you go and use tallow, for instance, digestibility will be lower. So you're not going to be as effective as you use palm oil or something that's a shorter chain fatty acid. At the end of the day, the differences are small. Okay, so I'm not very picky about the type of fat that I will use for a heat stress animal. As long as I provide the energy there and I don't go. One thing I try to avoid also is to feed more than 5.5% total fat in the diet, because if you go above that, you will contribute to a decrease in intake as well. Yeah? So animals eat by two mechanisms, also their energy needs, but they have sensors on the amount of energy density of the diet. And if they're eating a diet that's very energy dense, they will also eat less. So I would not go above 5.5, maybe maximum 6.
Okay. I saw a lot of questions that are linked to pHix-up, so I will wait for my presentation for that.
Yeah, you're the
expert. There is also a question asking, like, can magnesium be replaced by another component or additive in the ration?
Well, if you need magnesium for the cow, no, you cannot replace it. If you are thinking to replace it as an alkalinizer, there are not that many options either. Okay, calcium carbonate will not do the job. Sodium bicarbonate, you've seen the graph; it's less effective, and it will take much more, a greater amount. So there is no alternative.
Okay. So looking at the time, I will go through my presentation regarding some more elements about magnesium, magnesium oxide, and pHix-up. Feel free to continue to ask your questions in the chats if you have any. And then I will check back the question regarding pHix-up and magnesium oxide at the end. So knowing what Alex said, if we come back on the main consequences regarding heat stress, of course, we saw that dry matter intake can decrease during heat stress, which would cause a decrease of the acidosis risk because you have less starch going in the rumen. But then most of the situation, you will have a ration that will be adapted during heat stress with higher level of energy to compensate the loss of production. So then you increase the NFC level of the ration, and then you increase also the acidosis risk, especially that during heat stress period, you may have long fiber ingestion that will be reduced. We saw also that the bicarbonate ions can be excreted in urine, and then you will have an imbalance of the acid-base status of the animal. And apart from this, you have also the magnesium absorption that can be reduced. If we talk about acidosis, on that graph, you see the evolution of the pH during the day. So it's increasing during the night, then the feed is given in the morning, and you see the acid production, so then the pH decrease. Day 1, day 2, day 3, you have the same pattern every day. What we want to do when we are using buffer solution is first to be in the green area, and second is to reduce the maximum pH and increase the minimum pH to have something more stable during the day. So especially during heat stress when you have an increase of the energy of the ration. So what could be the solution? We want the products that have an effect on pH and a product that is also bringing some highly soluble magnesium. So pHix-up could be one solution, and we'll see how. So when we talk about magnesium oxide, we know that there is a huge variability, and I saw in the chat a lot of questions asking what kind of magnesium source could we use to bring magnesium. Here I'm explaining how we arrive to magnesium oxide. So we start with the magnesium carbonate that you can see here at the bottom. And this magnesium carbonate will be heated. Then you lose CO2. And at the end, MgCO3 minus CO2, you have MgO. But according to the origin, so if it's magnesium carbonate coming from Spain, Brazil, China, Greece, you don't have the same impurities. You don't have the same chemical structure of the magnesium carbonate at the beginning. So according to the origin, you have a difference of the magnesium oxide you will have at the end. According to the calcination process, so if you heat magnesium carbonate at 800 degrees, 900 degrees, 1000, you don't have the same magnesium oxide at the end. And it's something very important because the magnesium carbonate coming from Spain, if you want to have the highest solubility of this magnesium carbonate, you will have a specific temperature. And it won't be the same temperature as the one you would have for magnesium carbonate coming from Brazil or Greece. So you need to select the right temperature according to the location of the magnesium carbonate. So the calcination will be one factor that will impact the variability of the magnesium oxide. And then the particle size. So if you have big particles, the solubility will be lower compared to if you have very fine particles, which makes sense. If you look at this photo here, you can see the different color also. So for example, the one in the middle that is a bit red, you have a lot of iron inside that magnesium oxide. The ones that are white are more richer in silica. And the other one may have some iron, some silica also, some calcium. So it depends. But this is also impacting the effect on pH, the effect on the solubility of the magnesium oxide at the end. So knowing this, when we talk about pHix-up, I will explain you why it's different from classic magnesium oxide. So at the top here, you can see the different parameters that we took into account to formulate pHix-up. We took into account the morphology of the magnesium carbonate, so the magnesium at the beginning in the rock, and the impurities. So is it calcium, silica, iron? If we take this, it gives a location of the magnesium carbonate. So either Brazil, Spain, again. When we know the location, we need to select the heat treatments according to the composition and the chemical structure of the magnesium carbonate. It will make the magnesium oxide into specific crystalline phases. This part makes the control of the chemical properties of pHix-up. On the other side, you have the particle size that are selected to be some with very fine particles, others that are big particles, to make also different action on the solubility and on the effect on pH. So this is more like the physical properties of the product. So we can imagine that pHix-up is a blend of several magnesium oxide in different chemical structures that will have fast action, fast solubility. So let's say this chemical structure here on the left will act in 1-2 hours. And then other chemical structures that will have a long-term action on the pH. So if we look at pHix-up, magnesium oxide, and different magnesium salts, when you ask what kind of magnesium source should I use during heat stress, especially, or during other periods of the year. Here you can see the solubility of the magnesium salt, but not taking into consideration the magnesium content. So the highest, the product that will be with the highest solubility is magnesium chloride, then magnesium sulfate. But then if we took into consideration the quantity of magnesium inside those products, you can see that magnesium chloride and magnesium sulfate, they have a low amount of magnesium. So if we change this graph to this one, here we are looking at the quantity of magnesium that is solubilized according to the solubility and the magnesium content of each product. And you can see that it's the opposite. So finally, magnesium chloride and magnesium sulfate, they have low amount of magnesium. So they appear at the bottom with the lowest quantity of magnesium solubilized. Magnesium oxide A and B, which are like classic magnesium oxide, but very fine, they have a medium solubility of the magnesium. And pHix-up here at the top has the highest solubility of the magnesium, also because of the blend of the magnesium oxide sources inside it and the different chemical structure of the magnesium oxide inside it. So pHix-up here would be the product with the highest magnesium solubilized, so bringing the highest content of magnesium in the ration. When we talk about pH, because pHix-up, the first objective of the product is to act on pH. You can see here the evolution of the pH during time, so from 0 to 6 hours against other products. So pHix-up at 90 grams per cup a day will have exactly the same effect on pH as 250 grams of magnesium oxide, of sodium bicarbonate, sorry. So you have this ratio, 1 bag of pHix-up is equivalent to 3 bags of sodium bicarbonate. So less quantity to have the same action. And lithotamnium products that are also a lot used to have an effect on pH. You can see that those products, they are not very soluble at the rumen pH. So they can maintain the pH. They have a long-lasting action, but not fast, compared to sodium bicarbonate and pHix-up. So this is interesting, but what we want to know also is how does it work in the field? Because it's good to have some idea about the in vitro results, but in vivo, what's happening? So here it's a result we have from a trial we did in the US, in Texas, actually. So we had two groups at the same time. The first group was with sodium bicarbonate and magnesium oxide, and the second group was with sodium bicarbonate and pHix-up. It was for 3 months, and you have here some information about the diet. So you can see that it was a diet with a high level of concentrates, and you can see the evolution regarding magnesium level and sodium level in that ration. And in that first graph, you have the temperature and humidity index evolution during the study. So from the 7th of September to the end of October. And you can see that heat stress was quite high at the beginning, but staying between 72 and 80. So we had a huge heat stress during the whole study. And if we look at the results in terms of pH, we observed, so on average, each hour during the study, we observed that the proportion of time spent below 6 was reduced with pHix-up. So we are spending more time below pH 6 with sodium bicarbonate and magnesium oxide compared to pHix-up. So if we are spending less time under a low pH, it means that we reduce the risk of acidosis. And then if we look at the performances, we can see that in both groups, we have an equivalent milk production, equivalent fat and protein level, meaning that using pHix-up, so with a lower dosage compared to sodium bicarbonate and magnesium oxide, and with an economic gain in that case for the farmer, we have the same performances. And even here we had a difference in terms of days in milk in the pHix-up group compared to the sodium bicarbonate group. So we were a bit later in the lactation with, sorry, I think I did a mistake here. We were later in the lactation with pHix-up compared to sodium bicarbonate with the same milk production. So meaning that it was a bit better with pHix-up compared to sodium bicarbonate. And fat the same, protein the same. So globally, the results were quite positive, and the farmer was very happy with those results. So regarding some recommendations, using pHix-up. Initial situation, classic one would be 250 grams of sodium bicarbonate, 50 grams of magnesium oxide, some salt, some calcium carbonate. You have here some information about the level of magnesium, sodium, chloride that is bring only by those minerals that are here in that formulation. Option one would be removing entirely sodium bicarbonate. it's possible with pHix-up regarding the effect on pH. If you remove entirely sodium bicarbonate, you would expect to have the same effect on pH with 1/3 the dosage of pHix-up compared to sodium bicarbonate and magnesium oxide. The only thing is that you have to check the level of sodium, because if you are removing entirely sodium bicarbonate, of course, the sodium level will decrease, and we still want to be within the requirements. So one possibility is to increase a bit the level of salt to bring a bit more sodium. One other possibility, so option 2, would be to reduce the sodium bicarbonate level while using pHix-up to keep a good sodium level and still a good level of magnesium. So this would be for the whole lactation. But when we are talking about heat stress, we would advise to increase a bit the pHix-up dosage to increase the magnesium in the ration. So here I kept also sodium bicarbonate, 85 grams, salt and calcium carbonate would stay the same, but then pHix-up instead of 70 grams would be at 85 grams. And you can see that the neutralizing capacity here would be a bit higher. So all of these calculations are based on 23 kg of dry matter intake. So using pHix-up in those different options makes more space because you are using less product in total, and makes also an economic gain in most of the situation, depending on the area, of course. So feel free to ask any questions regarding this. If you want to have also more information about how to use pHix-up and our recommendation of usage, you can contact us, of course. We will be very happy to reply to this. I'm seeing that we are running out of time, so I will just check very quickly if we have new questions, but I don't think so. So I would say thank you to everybody, and thank you very much, Alex, for being there.
Well, thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure.
And I hope you learned a lot of things regarding heat stress, the use of magnesium during heat stress, how to manage heat stress, and also regarding pHix-up. For your information, this webinar will be available on replay for those of you that maybe didn't see the beginning or didn't see the end, I don't know. So this will be available on replay. And again, feel free to contact us for any questions. And so thank you. Have a good afternoon or a good day, depending on your area. Bye.
Bye-bye.